Okay, again, welcome to our Sunday morning New Horizons small group. We are using the Explore the Bible curriculum. We're in the first 19 chapters of the book of Genesis. We'll be in this set of curriculum through February, and then beginning in March, we'll pick up and do the rest of the book of Genesis. So for the next 6 months or so, we're in the book of Genesis. This is session number 8. It's titled Protect, and we're in Genesis 9. This is the third session in a 3-session topic. We're looking at Noah and the flood. So just kind of a quick reminder from the last 2 sessions. In the first session, we looked at Genesis chapter 6, which begins the story of Noah. At the end of chapter 5, Noah is 500 years old. He has 3 sons. And beginning of chapter 6, his family is contrasted to everybody else. And everybody else, as it says in chapter 6 at the beginning, was vicious, violent, non-believers. The only one who was righteous was Noah. And we assume his family, but it specifically says that Noah was seen as righteous. So God decides, as I've said the last couple of weeks, for the great do-over. He's going to start over. He's going to destroy everything that walks on the face of the earth. So that would include all the animals. That will include all of humankind. The only ones that will be left will be the ones that go into the ark with Noah and his family. In the remainder of chapter 6, we see God telling Noah to build an ark. And we talked a little bit about the size of the ark. The ark was about 1.5 footballs long, and it was about 3 levels. Each level was about 10 foot. So we had 3 levels, 10-foot ceilings in each level. And into the ark, Noah took all of the animals that God brought to him. Noah didn't have to go out and gather the animals. God brought the animals to him. Now, Noah had to prepare for the animals. So for the year that it took for the 100 years it took to build the ark, Noah had to grow grain and be able to put it up and to keep it, because he had to feed his family and he had to feed all the animals for over a year. They were on the ark for over a year. In chapter 7, we see God talking to Noah and telling him, it's time. Get on the ark. And once he's on the ark, they close the door, and he's in the ark for a week, and then the rains come. And we all know that it rained 40 days and 40 nights. What we don't think about sometimes was after it rained, it was over a year before the waters receded and they were able to land on the mountains of Ararat and to come out of the ark. And that's where we were last week. They were coming out of the ark. We talked about how they didn't come out of the ark until God told them to come out of the ark. So God spoke to Moses at least 3 times so far. He spoke to him once, I'm going to destroy the world, build an ark. Secondly, he spoke to him and said, okay, Noah, it's time you get in the ark. Now he's telling me last week, Noah, it's time to get off the ark. And now as we begin in chapter 9, we see the new covenant that God is making with Noah and his family. And the covenant is for Noah, his family, and all of their descendants. And since Noah and his family was the only humans left on the earth, by extension, that covenant covers everybody because we're all descendants of Noah. So that's where we are, and that's where we're starting today. What's the new covenant that he makes with Noah and his family? So here's your question for the day. You always know I got a question, so here's your question for the day. Be honest. How many people in here like to watch the outdoor reality shows on TV? And if you don't know what an outdoor reality show is, Survivor is the one that's probably the oldest one. So who watches outdoor reality shows?
Naked and Afraid?
Naked and Afraid is one. If you go and Google outdoor reality shows, you will be absolutely astonished as to how many they are. Now, a lot of them are on cable TV. But there's one called Survivor, which is probably the oldest. I just picked a few. One's called Alone. It's a cable show. Naked and Afraid. Life Below Zero. That doesn't sound good at all. And Running Wild. Those are just the ones I picked that I kind of have heard before. But there's a whole lot of it. When you go and look, Google had a listing of probably 15 or 20 outdoor reality shows. So there is a market for outdoor reality shows. And most of them deal with what would you do if you're the only one left? Cry? Well, think about it. When Noah comes off the ark, they're the only one left. So what do we do now? We spent a year on this ark with all of these smelly animals, and we talked last week, there were babies born on the ark. All the animals came off with families. Doesn't really tell us whether Noah's family had babies, but the animals came off with families. So there's a whole lot of people out there, and this is God's ultimate do-over. He's starting creation over again. So what kind of instructions is he going to give Noah and his family this time? Is it going to be different than he did the last time? You're going to have to wait and see. So Genesis chapter 9 is where we're starting. And as we go through it, there are going to be some things that I want you to kind of watch for. As we go through the verses and we look at the covenant, there are probably 4 things that's going to stand out or stood out to me when we look at what God's instruction is to Noah and his family in the great do-over. First off, we're going to see that God wanted to replenish the earth. First order of business back in creation was Adam and Eve, multiply, replenish, or populate the earth. Well, now it's going to be to replenish the earth. Secondly, he talked about food, because if you replenish the earth, you're going to have to feed the population. Thirdly, he talked about protection of life in the covenant. And lastly, he talks about how the covenant goes on and on and on. It's a perpetual covenant. It covers all of Noah's descendants, which, as I said a minute ago, really is all of us. Because everybody in the world today ultimately descended from Noah and his family. And then at the end of chapter 9, not in what we're going to talk about today, but the end of chapter 9 doesn't end so well. The end of chapter 9 is the story of Noah getting drunk after harvesting his vineyard, and his son Ham finding him unclothed and kind of making fun of him. And because of that, Ham's family is cursed going forward. And his family, through his son Canaan, will become the Canaanites, which is the groups of people who lived in the land of Canaan, which was the promised land later on. And also cause us problem next week when we get to the Tower of Babel. But this week we're going to concentrate on what's the covenant? What did God tell Noah and his family to do in the great do-over? So Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 to 4. Miss Francis, would you read King James for us, please?
And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. The flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat.
Okay. Bev, would you read NIV as well?
Okay, which ones?
9, 1 through 4.
Okay. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it.
Okay. In the Holman, verse 1 says, God blessed Noah and his sons. So the word for blessed here in the Hebrew means to strengthen or to build up or to give an advantage to. So Noah and his sons are blessed. They are built up. They're given an advantage over everything else that's left on the face of the earth. It's a show of favor from God to humanity in the face of Noah. And then he says to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Okay, keep your finger where it is. Flip back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. This is what Noah said to Adam and Eve. Chapter 1, verse 28. God blessed them. Okay, notice the parallel. God blessed Noah and his sons. Verse 28, God blessed them, Adam and Eve. And God in 9:1 says to Noah, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. In chapter 1, verse 28, he says, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Do you notice a difference? The first thing that he tells Noah and his family is basically, we're doing a second creation. You know, what I call the great do-over. And he issues the same command to them that he issued to Adam and Eve. And that is to be fruitful and multiply. Have lots of babies and spread all over the world. Next week we're going to find that that didn't go so well to start with. Tower of Babel. We'll get to that next week. However, in Genesis 1:28, in addition to spreading all over the world, he tells them to subdue it. Notice that's missing in this. He doesn't tell them to subdue the world. In the original language, according to a couple of commentaries I looked at, in the first creation, they were to be in dominion over the creatures of the world as God's representatives. Remember, at this point, fall hadn't happened yet. They were still blameless. They were still sinless. They were still in a proper relationship with God. So in addition to replenishing the world, or to populating the world, they were to be God's representatives and have dominion over everything. Notice that's not given here in Genesis 9. Instead, he says in verse 2, the fear and terror of you will be in every living creature on the earth, every bird of the sky, every creature that crawls on the ground, all the fish of the sea. They are placed under your authority. So instead of being God's representative, because at this point mankind is sinful, they're not in the correct relationship, so therefore they can really no longer be God's representatives. But God does give them authority, or I think the NIV said, give them under your hand. I think the NIV said, they're under the hand, they're under the authority of man because they fear man. So the dominion becomes based on fear, not on being God's representative.
James?
Yeah,
There's something I read, I think it was the quarterly when I read this.
gotta speak up, I can't hear you.
Okay, I read something in the quarterly, I don't know where it is, that I wasn't aware of before, but in the beginning, like in Genesis, they were vegetarians.
Yeah,
After the flood, they're gonna be meat eaters.
we're gonna come to that.
Oh, okay. And that's why they're afraid of us.
Yeah. The idea is, in fact, if you'll think back to the story of Cain and Abel, when Cain is thinking about killing his brother, what does God say to him? Basically, you have a choice, but sin is crouching to devour you. So we're not real sure, again, from the language, exactly what the relationship was at this point between man and animals, but at this point they've fallen, so they're no longer God's representative. So at this point, perhaps Cain and Abel, the symbolism is animals at this point were not afraid of man and would attack people. Well, here in verse 9, he says animals at this point are going to be afraid of, they're going to run from you. Because like you said a little bit later, he's going to give them food, give them his food. Verse 3 says, every living creature will be food for you. Now, go back to Genesis 1 again, or actually Genesis 2. He says, you have all the plants and the animals for your food. Many commentaries, many Bible scholars believe that up until this point, mankind was strictly vegetarian. We don't know if that's true or not, but that would be one way of interpreting what God said back in Genesis 2, when he says, I give you all the plants as food for you. Because here, notice in verse 3, it says, I give you every living creature for food. So at this point, God has authorized the eating of meat with restriction. I give you every living creature for food. As I gave you the green plants, I have given you everything. So anything you want to eat, you can eat. Verse 4, however, you must not eat meat with its life blood in it. When we get over to the Mosaic Law in Leviticus and Number, they get much more specific about how you have to cook meat if you're going to eat meat, and how you actually do sacrifices, because in the Hebrew culture and in the Old Testament, what needed to be shed for the remission of sin? Blood. So blood was the atoning force. I guess that's one way of looking at it, but blood was the atoning part of the sacrifice that was for the remission of sins. And eventually, New Testament, Christ's sacrifice, it was his blood that is the atonement for humanity's sin. So the blood part of it, the lifeblood as it says here, was looked to for the atonement of sin. So for the Jews and Noah's family going forward, the idea was you could eat meat, but you couldn't eat meat unless you drained the blood out of it, because that was for atonement of sins later on. Okay. Does that kind of follow what your question was, Bev?
Yeah, no, it was just, I had never thought about him being vegetarian until
Yeah.
the beginning. For some reason, it just never entered my.
It really doesn't tell us for sure that they were, but it does say you can own, while giving you all the vegetation
Uh-huh.
for
It
eating.
never says anything about him cooking meat.
Doesn't say anything about
And,
cooking
so
meat.
it's-
Now, did they cook meat?
I don't know, maybe.
I don't know. If they did, evidently it was probably not supposed to. You know, the clear reading of the scripture says, I've given you all the plant life for
I
eating.
have one of them. What about a rare steak? Does that mean it's got the blood in it?
I knew somebody was gonna ask
I know,
that.
I mean, I got this weird thing going in my mind.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, see, I don't either.
About the
I don't like
Jewish,
blood running when I'm eating my steak anyway.
Well, I don't either, but
with the Jewish people, how they don't eat like shrimp and certain things.
that's because they're unclean,
Those are unclean animals. That's not a blood issue.
yeah.
Oh.
There are certain animals, if you're, again, remember that when Noah went on the ark, he took pairs of all the unclean animals, but he took 7 pairs of the clean animals. And I guess Noah just knew which was which. God told him.
Well, the clean animals have a split hoof and chew their cud. Believe me,
Okay, I'll take your word for it. John?
trust me.
But after they came off the ark, everything was clean. God said, every
Eat
living
everything.
thing
Mhm.
you can eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Leviticus, we went back to,
Unclean and clean.
so,
Yeah,
and
who changed
today,
that?
we're, have at it.
Yeah. Today you can eat whatever you want to.
Because Peter and the sheep came down.
Yeah. Peter and the sheep came down. Okay. Verses 5 to 7. Charlie, would you read those, please? Genesis 9, 5 to 7.
Surely I will require your life blood. From every beast I will require it, and from every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. As for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly, and multiply in it.
Okay. Verse 5 in the Holman says, I will require the life of every animal and every man for your life and your blood. I will require the life of each man's brother for a man's life. So along with the permission to eat meat, there is a restriction. He gives a warning here. Verses 5 and 6, if you look at them together, are very similar in their wording. Jewish writings, if it's something that's really important, they will say it again in slightly different manner. So if you look at verse 5 and verse 6, they're very similar in what they say, but that's because it's intended to be an emphasis. It was something that was important. Life was important. What was God's command to Noah and his family? First thing he said, coming off the ark,
Be fruitful.
be fruitful and multiply. Life was important. So spread out, have lots of babies, cover the earth. Well, if you have people being killed by animals or other people, you're not fulfilling the original mandate. So don't kill. And if an animal kills a person, that animal was to be put down. We do the same thing today. If we have a wild animal that attacks people, generally that wild animal is trapped and euthanized. But notice it says the same thing here. If a person, if a human takes a human life, it says the same thing. I will require their life. Been used many times in the past as a justification for the death penalty. Notice it says, I will require the life of each man's brother for a man's life. The wording here is plural. It's not a recommendation for vengeance killings. if you think back to later in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, there's a verse in there that says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." God here to Noah is not saying it's okay to kill somebody in revenge. In fact, you get further into Leviticus and Deuteronomy, they set up sanctuary cities where people can flee if they're in danger of being killed for some act. However, it also says in those laws that if an ox gores somebody and that person dies, then the ox and the owner are liable to be put to death. But again, looking at the Leviticus laws, you had to have multiple witnesses to prove something. And I don't want to honestly get into a big discussion on the death penalty. I will simply say from my point of view, my biggest problem with the death penalty is too many times we don't have complete information. We don't have those multiple witnesses. How many people have you read being exonerated because of later data? That's my only problem with the death penalty, how it's done today. But look here in the Bible, God does say if a person kills another human and you have multiple witnesses, it was the community's responsibility to take vengeance for the Lord, to kill that person. We just don't, my opinion, we just don't do it right today. And I'll leave it with that. And then he does a transition. Look at verse 7. He goes from, if somebody gets killed, do this. He goes back to verse 7 and says, but you, don't go killing people. Your job is to be fruitful and multiply and spread over the earth and multiply. Make life, not death. Your job is to populate the earth. And again, we can get in all kinds of discussions about overpopulation and other things going on. I'm not getting political this morning. My politics was what I just said about death penalty. We're going to leave it with that. Okay, 8 through 15. Bill, would you read those for us? 8 to 15.
Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, understand that I am confirming my covenant with you and your descendants after you. And with every living creature that is with you, birds, livestock, and all wildlife of the earth that are with you, all the animals of the earth that came out of the ark. I confirm my covenant with you, that never again will every creature be wiped out by waters of a flood. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. How far do you want me to go?
Through 15.
And God said, this is a sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all future generations. I have placed my vow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between man and earth. Whenever I form clouds over the earth, and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures. Water will never again become a flood to destroy every creature.
Okay. God makes a transition. He's talked about how much he values life, particularly human life, because after all, humans are made in the image of God. So if we are the image of God, life is important. And he transitions from that to again talking about his covenant. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, understand that I am confirming my covenant with you and your descendants after you. A few chapters back, he made the covenant. Now he's, depending on how the word is translated, fixing, confirming, establishing, he's saying, what I said the first time, I really meant. This is what the contract is going to be between you and your family and ultimately your descendants. Verse 10 says, and with every living creature that is with you. So his covenant is with all life, not only humans, but animals, birds. With every living creature that is with you. Everything that came off the ark. Birds, livestock, and all wildlife of the earth that came out of the ark. I confirm my covenant with you that never again will all flesh be wiped out by the waters of a deluge. There will never again be a deluge to destroy the earth. 3 or 4 times in there it says, I will never. Never again. And 3 or 4 times he talks about not only is this with Noah and his family and the descendants, it's with all life. It's an all-encompassing covenant. The word covenant is kind of interesting. The word covenant actually means to cut. And I didn't know this again until I started trying to get ready for the last couple of lessons. But when they cut a contract in this time frame, the way they would sign or confirm the contract is they would take animals for sacrifice. They would cut them in the middle, put them on each side, and the signees to the contract, to the covenant, would walk between the cut animals. The symbolism being, if I break this covenant, may the same thing be done to me. Notice, though, in God's covenant, he's the only one that makes the covenant. He's the only one, if you will, that walks between the sacrifice. It's a unilateral covenant. All humanity had to do was to trust and obey, just like in the Garden of Eden. Trust and obey. That's your part of the covenant. Everything else, all the blessings that come from that, that's God's part. You don't have to do anything to earn it. Just trust and obey. Unlike what had just happened, the annihilation of all life that walked or was on the ground, now we're starting over. And he says, he makes the promise that there will be no flood in the future to destroy the earth. I mentioned last week, there is a destruction of the universe coming if you go to Revelation. But it's not by flood. It's by fire. Because that's where the old world is destroyed and the new heaven and the new earth is established after its destruction. But that destruction is by fire, not by flood. And to show that he means business, he actually put a sign in the sky to tell us about it. Verse 12, and God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I'm making between you and me and you and every living creature, all encompassing. A covenant for all future generations, us included. I have placed my bow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and you. The rainbow is a sign that God remembers what he has promised. It's his covenant. Again, it's not a you and me covenant. It's a my covenant. It's not anybody's responsibility but his. Rainbows appear in other places in the Old and New Testament, and in every place they appear, they are a sign of God's presence. They are an indication that God, it says remembered, verse 14, I will remember my covenant. Doesn't mean God forgot it. It just simply means God will act on his covenant. The word remember, translated from the Hebrew, basically means I'm going to act on what I've said. Whenever I form clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember, I will act on my covenant. Between me and you and every living creature on all flesh, water will never again destroy all flesh. So the rainbow is a sign not only for Noah's family, but for every generation coming, that never again will God destroy all life by flood. Revelation tells us there is a judgment coming where there will be a division between those who are believers and those who are not. And then there will be destruction through fire. Now, one thing I found interesting when I was reading, and I used to teach science, so I should have remembered this, but I didn't. When do you see a rainbow? After rain.
When the sun is shining.
When the sun is shining.
Back is coming towards
The
sun.
important thing is, I may see the rainbow and you may not see the rainbow. It's based on your position. You have to be positioned with the sun behind you, you're here, and the rain in front of you. Otherwise, you don't see the rainbow. It's positional. A rainbow is if you want to take the symbol a little bit further, the rainbow is a symbol of our position with God. That because of what he has said, we're in the position to be able to see God because of his covenant. That may be stretching it, but I liked what the guy said. Again, God was the one who made it. It's a unilateral covenant. All mankind has to do is believe and trust. God does everything else. Anybody else with something they'd like to add or question or something?
Just a little trivia idea. Our sons took a trip to go fishing in Alaska several years ago. My younger one came home, he said, "Mom, I saw a rainbow from the plane." He said, "the small plane, he said it made a complete circle." He said, there are no words to explain. What, it really touched him to see that. He said, it is a complete circle. He said, it is the covenant, he could just see it. He said, it was the most,
Just surrounds you.
yeah, just beyond words.
I've seen that a few times on a plane, not often, but yes.
Yeah, it was really touching.
Anybody else? Okay, so nobody has any hard questions this morning. A couple of weeks ago, you kept joking about giving me hard questions, so thankfully, no, you had your chance.
Oh,
Let's close with prayer, then I'll give you a chance.
okay.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this story of Noah and the flood. Thank you for the example of Noah and his obedience to you. When you said build an ark, you built an ark. When you said get on, you got on. When you said get off, he got off. Thank you for that example, that we need not to argue or question, but when you are leading, when you are prompting us to do something, may we say yes, sir, and get on with it. As Mike said this morning, may we in the Spirit, with the Spirit's help, be able to be the witnesses that we need to be for you and the world around us. For we ask it in your name.